The first scream was swallowed by music. Inside the grand ballroom of Ravenhurst Manor, the orchestra played a lively Viennese waltz, sweeping guests across the polished marble floor. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting golden halos across gowns, jewels, and champagne glasses. It was, by every imaginable measure, an evening designed for delight, an anniversary gala hosted by Lord and Lady Ashcombe, one of London's most influential couples. They had spent a fortune ensuring that the night would be nothing less than unforgettable. And it was, but not for the reasons they intended. Among the swirl of silk and satin, one figure remained strangely out of place. A woman in a midnight blue dress who kept close to the walls, half hidden by the shadows cast by towering floral arrangements. She did not dance, nor join conversations. She watched. Her eyes followed certain individuals with an intensity that would have been alarming, had anyone noticed her at all. But she moved with the quiet anonymity of someone who had long mastered the art of being unseen. Just before the orchestra reached its crescendo, she slipped out of the ballroom and disappeared down one of the dimly lit corridors that branched away from the main hall. 20 minutes later, Lady Ashcombe's shriek tore through the music, and this time, everyone heard it. The waltz came crashing to a halt. Guests froze, heads turning like startled birds toward the grand staircase where Lady Ashcombe clung to the banister, trembling violently. "Someone! Fetch help!" she cried, her voice breaking. Before anyone could react, Lord Ashcombe thundered up the stairs, his face pale beneath its distinguished lines. Guests surged forward, murmuring, whispering, speculating. Only a handful followed closely behind as the couple raced toward the east wing, where Lady Ashcombe had been retrieving her husband's engraved pocket watch, a family heirloom to show a curious guest. But the pocket watch was no longer the concern, because in the dimly lit antechamber of the Ashcombe's private study lay the body of Eleanor Whitfield, a wealthy widow and long-time friend of the family. Her elegantly gloved hand was curled unnaturally near her throat, and her pearl necklace had snapped, scattering beads across the carpet like fallen stars. Her expression was frozen in terror, her eyes wide open as though she had seen something, someone she recognized. The gasps echoed down the hallway. "Good heavens," Lord Ashcombe whispered, kneeling beside her. "Eleanor, Eleanor, what in God's name happened?" A few guests, braver or more curious than the rest, stepped forward. Others instinctively backed away, their faces draining of color. "Is she?" Lady Ashcombe's voice faltered. One look told the answer. Eleanor Whitfield was dead. Before panic could erupt, a measured voice cut through the growing hysteria. "Mesdames et messieurs," said a calm, precise voice from the back of the crowd, "you must not disturb the scene. Order must be maintained, yes?" The guests turned. Standing in the corridor, immaculate in a perfectly pressed evening suit, was Hercule Poirot. Though he had not been an invited guest, merely accompanying Inspector Japp, who had been called briefly to the manor earlier regarding an unrelated matter, his presence at the gala was not entirely unusual. Poirot had a way of appearing where trouble brewed, as though fate itself placed him strategically at the heart of mysteries. And fate had rarely been wrong. Poirot stepped closer, his sharp eyes taking in every detail, the scattered pearls, the overturned small table nearby, the faint scent of jasmine clinging to the air. He noticed, too, a half-drawn curtain near the far window, as though someone had slipped out or in moments before Eleanor's body was discovered. Lady Ashcombe swayed, visibly shaken. Poirot's tone softened. "Madame, please sit. Someone bring her water." But Lady Ashcombe shook her head. She was just speaking with me an hour ago, perfectly well. She said she needed a moment alone, but she seemed frightened. Poirot's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. "Frightened? Did she say why?" "No." Lady Ashcombe pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Only that she felt someone was watching her. Watching her. Poirot filed the words away. Lord Ashcombe rose abruptly. "Where is Inspector Japp? He must be summoned at once." Poirot cleared his throat delicately. "Alas, my friend Japp has already departed. It was only by chance that I remained a little longer to speak with him. But rest assured, Lord Ashcombe, Hercule Poirot is here." The murmurs grew louder. A crime of this severity in such a select circle of society cast suspicion like a thick fog, and though the guests were outwardly horrified, several exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot noticed each one. He knelt beside the body, lowering his head in a brief moment of respectful silence. Then, with great care, he examined the broken pearls. They had snapped near the clasp. Not from brute force, but from a sudden, swift tug. A struggle, then. "And where," he murmured, almost to himself, "is the pocket watch Lady Ashcombe came to retrieve?" Lord Ashcombe blinked. My watch? You think it connected?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, his attention drifted toward the half-open curtain. A single bead from the broken necklace lay near the window, far from the others. Unnatural. Deliberate, perhaps. Behind the curtain, a side door led out to the manor's balcony, and from the balcony, a staircase descended discreetly to the gardens. A perfect exit route. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Someone had left this room in haste. Someone who had been watching Eleanor Whitfield and had struck before she could speak of her fear. Behind him, voices trembled. Who would want Eleanor dead? She was a friend to everyone. Yes, but friendships can be masks, you know. Was it robbery? That emerald brooch she wore, it must be worth a fortune. Poirot stood, smoothing his jacket. No. This was not robbery. This was something far more personal. Lady Ashcombe gasped. "Then you believe the killer is one of us?" Poirot looked at the 10 or so guests gathered in the corridor, each an acquaintance of Eleanor's, each with their own histories, rivalries, secrets. "My lady," Poirot said gently, "the killer is always among the circle. It is merely a question of who had the reason and who had the fear." As he spoke, Poirot's eyes drifted toward the shadowed end of the corridor. For just a moment, he thought he saw the faint silhouette of a woman, the same quiet, watchful woman in the midnight blue dress, standing in the darkness. And then she was gone. Ravenhurst Manor, in daylight, was a different thing from the glittering stage it had cut for last night's gala. The chandeliers seemed less forgiving in the sober light. Carpets, draped with caution tape, showed the faint prints of many nervous footsteps. Servants moved with a new, careful precision, as though the house itself had learned suspicion. Outside, the gardens were grey and ordered, privet hedges standing like sentinels. Inside, however, a far more volatile order had taken hold. The brittle civility of a small, closed world, suddenly aware that violence had breached its polite boundaries. By 10 o'clock that morning, the 10 people who had been nearest to Eleanor Whitfield on the night before were gathered, some by instruction, some by circumstance, in the great library. The room was heavy with book scent and the hush of people trying not to betray the tremor beneath their voices. Poirot stood by the fireplace, hands folded, watching each arrival with the gentle, appraising interest of a man watching a play he already half understood. There was Lady Ashcombe, still ringed about with shock, her face carefully composed under a pallor that no powder could disguise. Lord Ashcombe, rigid and angry, paced as though speed might outrun the fact of death. Dr. Leonard Langley, the family physician, arrived with the sober air of a man who had seen too many ends to be impressed by the drama of one more. Miss Beatrice Carter, Eleanor's niece, young, quick of temper, and with eyes that refused to be anything but direct, sat rigidly in a corner. Colonel Raymond Halsey, a retired man of affairs, bore his years with a respectable impatience and the air of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mrs. Gwendolen Price, always immaculate, rarely friendly, sipped tea with an appropriately genteel contempt. Mr. Samuel Reed, a shrewd-looking businessman in a neat suit, kept his hands folded as if protecting his ledger. Julian March, an artist whose face still bore traces of last night's revelry, looked pale and bewildered. He had been Eleanor's companion on the dance floor. Rosa, one of the maids, stood with her head bowed, the honest shame of servants visible on her face. Thomas Briggs, the gardener, remained outside, summoned in from the grounds and still smelling faintly of damp earth. And somewhere beyond the library's high windows, somewhere among the winding corridors and the servants' passages, there remained the memory of a woman in a midnight blue dress, the one who watched from the walls and then vanished. No one claimed her, and no one claimed to have seen her depart. The image, like a smudge, hardened into suspicion. "Mes amis," Poirot began, lifting his hand with a poised, almost theatrical restraint. "We are gathered in circumstances most disagreeable. We must, however, speak plainly among ourselves. Each person here was present at the house last night. Each person had proximity to Madame Whitfield. Therefore, each person is of interest to me." He inclined his head politely to each face as though announcing a small personal judgment. "I shall ask each of you to recount, as briefly as you can, your movements from 9 o'clock to the discovery of the body. Afterwards, I shall ask questions." Inspector Japp had been telephoned and was due within the hour, Poirot said, but until Japp's arrival the responsibility of maintaining order fell rather inevitably upon him. No one objected. Their common discomfort smoothed the way. First, Lady Ashcombe's testimony. She had been on the staircase retrieving her husband's watch when she had encountered Eleanor, who, she said, had seemed nervous. They had parted shortly after, Eleanor asking to borrow a moment of privacy. Lady Ashcombe's hands trembled as she described it, enough to convince few that she was composed, and many that she spoke truly. Her motive, should motive ever present itself, lay only in social entanglement. Eleanor had been a close adviser to both husband and wife, a confidant whose opinions had long been valued, and, sometimes, resented. Lord Ashcombe's account was brusque. He'd been speaking with Mr. Reed about a matter of investments, Lord Ashcombe himself being a man used to financial maneuvering. He admitted that his marriage with Lady Ashcombe had weathered storms. Occasionally, Eleanor had offered counsel that cut too close to the bone, but he declared, with the flush of wounded pride, that he had no wish, no reason to harm Eleanor. Dr. Langley, whose presence should have been comforting, reported that he had been checking on a guest who complained of vertigo. He confirmed that the cause of Eleanor's sudden death, to the very ordinary eye, was asphyxiation, the broken necklace suggesting a brief struggle. His professional detachment read as plausible, though Poirot's gaze lingered on the doctor's hands. They were not the steady hands of a man unaffected by the sight of death. Beatrice Carter spoke with an edge of anger. Eleanor had been her mentor, but their relationship had lately soured over money. Beatrice needed funds. "Eleanor's will," whispered Beatrice, in a tone meant to be private but overheard, had been the subject of late arguments. She denied any ill intent, but the tone of her denial carried the quickness of the one who most feared being disbelieved. Colonel Halsey had been in the billiard room, complaining of a headache. He resented talk of modernity, of certain investments, and had been known to clash politely with Eleanor on the subject of the local orphanage. Eleanor being a benevolent patron, the Colonel being a practical man. Gwendolen Price, forever cool, revealed that she had quarreled with Eleanor some months ago over a matter of garden arrangements. A detail so trivial it should have been amusing, were it not now a possible ember in a larger fire. Mr. Reed, who had more reason than most to be economical with the truth, admitted a heated argument with Eleanor about an alleged misappropriation of funds in a charitable trust. Julian March, the artist, looked as if the question itself pained him. He had been with Eleanor, he said, but they had parted amicably at midnight. Rosa, the maid, could only say she had left Eleanor to sit and compose herself in the antechamber, and when she returned, then the scream had come. Thomas Briggs, summoned in, produced a small, begrimed handkerchief. He had been seen near the east wing around the time of the murder, he admitted, but he protested that he had been gathering a decorative shrub dragged in by the wind. Nothing more. His language was plain, his alibi thin. Poirot listened to each with an expression of gentle gravity. He made not the slightest attempt to hide his interest in the ways they contradicted one another. He noted when a voice quickened, where a hand smoothed a coat, when a gaze preferred the floor. It was, as ever, the small, involuntary movements, the little disquieting details, that to him were loud as trumpets. At the end of the recitations, Poirot rose and moved to the mantelpiece, where a small tray of things lay, objects recovered from the antechamber. He picked up the single pearl that had been found apart from the rest, the bead that had lain near the curtained window. He turned it between his fingers. "See how it is scuffed," he murmured. "Not merely broken, bruised. Someone clumsy, perhaps, or someone who struggles." He then placed it down gently and looked out past the tall windows at the gardens. "And yet, there is also here a scent," he added, closing his eyes for the merest moment. "A light perfume. Violet. Not the jasmine that clung to the curtains. Violet is the perfume of some women who wish to be remembered and forget little." A stir ran through the group. Beatrice's hand went to her throat as if feeling for a necklace. Mrs. Price's eyes narrowed. Poirot's gaze fell last upon the empty chair where no one sat. A silence in the circle, a presence absent. "And there is, mes amis, another matter," he said quietly. "A woman was seen last night in a dress of deepest blue, watching. She has not been found. She matters." The group's attention snapped to the doorway as if drawn by a magnet. The woman who followed shadows had, for the moment, made this closed circle ever so slightly less closed. Poirot allowed his gaze to rest upon each face in turn. "I shall speak to each of you in private," he said, "for the truth hides often in what people say when they are not speaking to many. Be patient, we shall know more soon." He had said little of the cause of death. He had said nothing at all of culpability. But the air in the library had shifted. Suspicion had been arranged into a pattern, and the next move belonged to Poirot. At the doorway, unnoticed until that moment, a small scrap of folded paper lay where someone had dropped it. A scrap with a single word written in a hurried hand. Poirot, whose eyes missed nothing, stooped and picked it up. He smiled that very faint private smile which meant his little grey cells had begun to work. Hercule Poirot preferred private interviews. Public statements, he always said, were the theatre masks people wore. But in quiet rooms, behind closed doors, with no audience to impress or rivals to intimidate, then the human soul revealed its little cracks. He chose the morning room for the first conversations, a warm, sunlit space overlooking the east garden. A small round table, 2 polished chairs, no shadows in which to hide one's trembling. Poirot positioned himself so the light fell squarely upon the interviewee, illuminating every flicker of discomfort. He himself remained in partial shade, immaculate and politely inscrutable. A knock came. Lady Ashcombe entered first. She moved with the fragility of someone holding herself together by sheer will. Poirot offered her a seat and a glass of lemon water. She accepted both with a grateful nod. "Madame," he said gently, "you were among the last to speak with Eleanor Whitfield. Tell me, if you please, what truly passed between you." Lady Ashcombe exhaled slowly. "We did not argue, Monsieur Poirot. We never argued. Eleanor was steadfast, yes, but never cruel." Poirot inclined his head. "Yet you said she seemed frightened." "Yes." She hesitated. She kept glancing toward the windows of the landing. I asked if she was unwell. She replied that she felt watched. "Watched by whom?" Lady Ashcombe's hands twisted together. I don't know. She started to say a name. She... But then she shook her head and told me not to worry. Poirot's eyes sharpened. She said she. Yes. Then it is a woman she feared. Lady Ashcombe looked startled, as though she had not realized what she had admitted. I suppose so. Poirot steepled his fingers. Did she mention the gala guest list? Did she ask about any particular woman? No. Lady Ashcombe's voice thinned. But there was something odd. When she spoke, Eleanor kept pressing her hand against her collarbone, as though guarding something. Poirot filed that away. And the pocket watch you came to retrieve, was it missing before or after the murder? I never reached the study, Lady Ashcombe whispered. I never saw the watch at all. Poirot nodded once, marking her sincerity and her fear. Merci, madame. I may call you again. She rose, composed but shaken, and slipped out. Next came Mr. Samuel Reed, the businessman. He entered briskly, sitting down with the confidence of a man who disliked having his time wasted. His suit was impeccable, his expression guarded. Mr. Reed, Poirot began, your argument with Madame Whitfield. What was its nature? A misunderstanding, Reed said crisply. A discrepancy in accounts for the Whitfield Trust. I accused her of mismanaging funds. She accused me of creative accounting. His jaw tightened. It was all nonsense. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Nonsense or truth? Reed bristled. If you think I would commit murder over financial quarrels. Ah, not murder, perhaps, Poirot said mildly. But anger, resentment, they can cloud the reason. Reed leaned forward. Eleanor was wrong about me, but I respected her. I have enemies, Monsieur Poirot, but she was not one of them. Poirot observed the man's fingernails. Perfectly manicured, faintly ink-stained. A man of numbers, a man of precision. Yet when Poirot asked where he had been at the exact moment of the murder, Reed hesitated a fraction too long. Near the ballroom, he said. Poirot smiled politely. How convenient. Reed stiffened. I do not appreciate your insinuations. Then I shall save them, monsieur, for someone who does. Beatrice Carter entered next, her chin high, her eyes flashing with indignation before she even sat. Let us be quick, she said. I know how these things go. I am young. I had disagreements with my aunt. Therefore I am suspect. Very well. Ask your questions. Poirot studied her with quiet amusement. Mademoiselle, it is you who bring your conscience into the room, not I. Beatrice blinked. My conscience is clear. Then you will not mind telling me why you left the ballroom shortly before midnight. She froze. I felt tired. Poirot smiled gently. You are young. You are not easily fatigued. Beatrice swallowed. Fine. I stepped out to clear my head. And you walked where? Along the east corridor. Poirot's eyebrow lifted. The corridor where the murder occurred? She paled. I didn't go near the study. Poirot made a thoughtful sound. Beatrice's voice trembled despite her bravado. I had no reason to harm my aunt. But you had financial difficulties, n'est-ce pas? Beatrice pressed her lips together. She was going to help me. She promised. Poirot's eyes softened. You loved her. Tears welled suddenly in her eyes. Yes. Poirot let the silence sit between them until she gathered herself. You may go, mademoiselle. She hurried out without another word. Colonel Halsey arrived stiff-backed and irritable. He disliked both deference and being questioned. I was in the billiard room, he barked. Ask anyone. And you did not see Madame Whitfield? No. Why would I? We have disagreed for years. Over the orphanage. Yes, he snapped. That woman had the charitable sense of a duchess with a guilty conscience. She flung money at problems. Disgracefully sloppy. Poirot tapped the table lightly. You disliked her methods enough to kill? The colonel's face purpled. Monsieur Poirot. I fought in 2 wars. I did not strangle dowagers at parties." Poirot said nothing. He simply watched the colonel's twitching left hand. "Was she still wearing her emerald brooch when you last saw her?" Poirot asked casually. "No idea," the colonel muttered. But he avoided Poirot's eyes, and Poirot never missed such details. Next came Rosa, the maid, frightened, earnest, and unpolished. "I saw Madame Whitfield in the corridor," she whispered. "She looked pale. She asked me for a glass of water." "And did you fetch it?" "Yes, sir. When I returned, she was gone. I thought she went to the balcony." Poirot leaned forward. "The balcony?" "Yes, sir. The curtain was moving, as if someone had passed through." Poirot felt a spark flicker in his mind. "And did you see anyone else?" Rosa hesitated. Only a swish of fabric. Blue. Like a dark, dark sea." Poirot's breath stilled. "The woman in the midnight blue dress?" Rosa nodded fearfully. "That is all I know, sir. Truly." Poirot thanked her with genuine warmth. Julian March, the artist, entered last. His hair was tousled, his nerves more so. "I adored Eleanor," he said immediately. "She was kind. She believed in my art." Poirot murmured, "And she funded it?" Julian flushed. "She lent me money. Only a little." "And her death cuts off your support?" "I would never hurt her." Poirot studied the man's trembling hands, hands that painted beauty but were trembling with guilt or fear. "Did you dance with her last night?" "Yes." She became distracted halfway. "She said she saw someone staring at her." Poirot leaned in slightly. "A man or a woman?" "A woman," Julian whispered. "Someone standing near the pillars, watching her." Poirot felt the pattern emerging, sharp and undeniable. He dismissed Julian gently. When the last suspect had left, Poirot sat alone in the morning room, eyes half closed, fingers steepled. Outside, the manor was quiet. Inside, the truth shifted like a shadow slipping along the walls. 3 things were now certain. Eleanor Whitfield had feared a woman. That woman had followed her, and that woman, whoever she was, had vanished without trace. Poirot opened his palm. Inside lay the crumpled paper he had found at the end of Section 2. He smoothed it delicately. One word was written in sharp, hurried strokes. She. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Oui," he whispered. "It is the beginning." By mid-afternoon, Ravenhurst Manor felt less like a home and more like a sealed chamber. The doors were guarded, the windows checked, and every whisper echoed through the corridors like a guilty confession. Inspector Japp had arrived in a flurry of irritation and authority, though even he seemed relieved that Poirot was already guiding the investigation. Japp barked at constables, questioned servants, and made a great show of searching for physical clues. Muddy footprints, fingerprints, cigarette ash, stray fibers. Poirot observed this with his usual polite disdain. "Always the physical evidence, mon ami," he murmured. "One day you will learn. People are the more untidy, the more revealing." Japp sighed. "And one day, Poirot, you'll learn that mud doesn't lie." Poirot gave a small, elegant shrug. "People lie. Mud is merely misunderstood." But soon enough, even Japp thought he had found something compelling. It began when a constable called out from the east garden. "Inspector, over here!" Japp hurried down the stone steps. Poirot followed at his own dignified pace. At the far end of the garden, near the hedgerow where twilight shadows already gathered, 2 officers stood over a patch of disturbed soil. Lying atop it was a glinting object, small, metallic, unmistakable. Lord Ashcombe's engraved pocket watch. Japp let out a low whistle. "Well now, that's interesting." Poirot leaned down, studying the soil but careful not to touch the item. The watch lay half buried as though dropped in haste. The lid was scratched, the chain snapped. Lord Ashcombe, who had been summoned and was now hurrying across the lawn, gasped when he saw it. "My watch! But this is impossible. I haven't touched that watch since last night." Poirot watched him closely. His shock seemed genuine. But there was something else, a flicker of fear beneath the outrage. Japp, however, smelled blood. If your watch was taken from the study, perhaps someone stole it after attacking Mrs. Whitfield. Poirot's voice was mild. Perhaps. Japp crouched, pointing to subtle impressions in the soil. Footprints. Small feet. Narrow stride. A woman's, I'd bet. At that, Poirot's eyes glinted with interest. Not in the footprints themselves, but in how readily Japp leapt to conclusions. "And look here," Japp continued, lifting something carefully with tweezers. "Fabric. Caught on the hedge." A tiny scrap of cloth fluttered in the air. Dark blue. Poirot heard the sharp inhalation of Lady Ashcombe from behind. Several others had followed, drawn like moths to the scent of accusation. At the sight of the blue fabric, whispers rippled through them. The woman in the midnight blue dress. She was seen near the corridor, wasn't she? She slipped out into the garden. It must be her. Beatrice Carter stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Inspector, I saw a woman in a dress like that near the east wing before the murder. She was tall, dark-haired. I thought her a guest I didn't know." Mrs. Price added, "I saw her too. She moved oddly, too quiet, like a servant pretending to be a lady." Colonel Halsey harumphed, or a lady pretending to be a servant. Either way, she was up to something. Mr. Reed folded his arms. "Suspicious, certainly. Why hide in shadows at a gala?" Japp's grin widened. "Well, well, looks like we have ourselves the mysterious woman in blue. Maybe she stole the watch, overheard something she shouldn't have, or had some grievance against Mrs. Whitfield. And maybe," added Mrs. Price with relish, "she thought she wouldn't be recognized if she slipped away after the murder." Poirot remained silent. His silence was louder than any protest. Japp rounded on him. "Surely even you can't deny it, Poirot. Blue cloth, lady's footprints, the missing watch, the witnesses who saw her lurking. This woman, whoever she is involved." Poirot lifted the scrap of fabric delicately from Japp's hand. He studied the weave, the hem, the faint perfume still clinging to the fibers. "Yes," he said softly. "She is involved." Japp beamed triumphantly. Poirot continued, "But not in the way you imagine." Japp frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Poirot tucked the cloth into a small envelope, sealing it with a neat fold. "It means, mon ami, that you have found a clue, but not the clue you think." Japp sputtered. "Poirot, you're impossible." Poirot smiled. "Naturellement." When the pocket watch and blue cloth were carried back to the manor for cataloguing, tension reached a new pitch. Lady Ashcombe had turned nearly white. "That woman. I remember now," she whispered to Poirot. "She stood near Eleanor earlier in the evening, looking at her, no, studying her." Poirot nodded. "Many people study many others, madame. It is the intention that matters." Beatrice, however, seemed deeply unsettled. "She wasn't a guest," she muttered. "I'm sure of it. I know every face from London society. And hers was unfamiliar. Sharp features, intense eyes." Mr. Reed added dryly, "Perhaps a thief, then, or someone with a grudge." Colonel Halsey huffed. "A woman skulking around in the dark, trying to pass unnoticed? Sounds guilty to me." Only Dr. Langley was silent, his eyes focused elsewhere, as though watching something unfold in his mind. Poirot noticed. Poirot noticed everything. By the time everyone reconvened in the library, Japp had shaped a tidy theory. "We're looking for an outsider," he concluded. "A woman who sneaked into the gala disguised as a guest. She follows Mrs. Whitfield, steals the watch, maybe panics when Eleanor sees her, and—" He sliced the air with his hand. "Strangles her. then escapes through the balcony stairs into the garden, dropping the watch in her haste. A murmur of agreement passed through the group. Even Lord Ashcombe exhaled with something like relief. The idea that the murderer might be a stranger, a faceless intruder, was infinitely preferable to suspecting one's friends. Poirot allowed the theory to settle, allowed the relief to bloom, allowed the room to believe, for a moment, the comfortable lie. Then he spoke. "An intruder," Poirot repeated softly. "A mysterious woman, unknown to all." "Yes," Japp said. "Makes perfect sense." Poirot clasped his hands neatly. "Then why?" he asked. "Did the mysterious woman know exactly where the Ashcombes kept the pocket watch?" Japp froze. Poirot continued. "Why would a thief hide the watch in the garden rather than keep it? Why would she linger near Madame Whitfield, following her, frightening her? And why?" His voice sharpened. "Would someone planning a murder wear a dress so distinctive that 4 people remembered it?" Silence thickened like fog. Poirot's gaze swept the room, slow, deliberate, cutting through their relief. "No," he said at last. "La femme mystérieuse is not a stranger." He tapped the sealed envelope. "She is someone known, someone expected, someone who wanted to appear unseen while being very much present." He turned toward the window, where long shadows stretched across the lawn. "This woman in blue," Poirot murmured, "is not our murderer. She is our witness." Gasps, shock, confusion. And then Poirot added quietly, "She followed Eleanor Whitfield because she feared the same enemy." A stillness settled over Ravenhurst Manor that evening, an uneasy hush, as though the very walls were holding their breath. The false lead had unraveled, yet the tension remained coiled, vibrating through the house like a taut string ready to snap. The suspects retreated to their rooms or wandered the corridors in restless, guilty loops. Servants whispered. Doors closed too quickly. Eyes avoided meeting Poirot's. This was the moment Poirot relished. Not the shock of murder, nor the chase for fingerprints, but this, the quiet afterward, when fear began to work upon the mind. "Now," Poirot murmured to himself, "the little grey cells begin their dance." Instead of interrogating further, Poirot moved through the house with deliberate casualness, pausing to speak to people in passing, commenting on trifles, dropping small remarks that were not quite accusations, yet not entirely innocent. He had once told Hastings, "To catch an animal, my friend, you do not chase it. You let it hear the hunter's steps. Then it betrays itself." This was precisely his approach now. He began with Dr. Leonard Langley, whom he found arranging medical instruments in a small case. "Doctor," Poirot said softly, "I admire your efficiency. You prepare as though expecting departure?" Langley froze. "Inspector Japp said I might be needed for further examination. I'm simply tidying." "A man who tidies is a man with a restless conscience," Poirot remarked lightly. Langley's jaw tightened. "Are you implying something?" "Only that you were very quiet today. Too quiet. A man with knowledge refrains from speaking lest he say too much." Langley's eyes flickered. Wary, defensive. "I have nothing to hide." Poirot gave a small, polite bow. "We shall see." He left Langley frowning at his own hands. Next, Poirot drifted toward the portrait gallery, where Beatrice Carter paced back and forth beneath the severe gaze of oil-painted ancestors. "Your aunt was generous to you," Poirot said quietly, stepping beside her. "Yet generosity can be a burden to some. It is not easy to owe money to a proud woman." Beatrice halted, glaring. "She said she would help me. She promised." Poirot nodded. Yet sometimes promises change. Wills are rewritten. Inheritance is a fickle thing. She paled. "Why are you saying this?" Poirot offered a mild smile. "To see how you respond." Beatrice's eyes flashed with indignation, then fear. Poirot saw both and filed them away before strolling on, his hands neatly behind his back. Outside, in the dimming twilight, Poirot found Thomas Briggs, the gardener, trimming dead leaves with more aggression than horticulture required. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Briggs," Poirot greeted him gently. Briggs stiffened. "Evening, sir. You knew Madame Whitfield well?" "Aye, well enough. She liked her garden tidy, didn't like the wild things growing free." His snip of the shears punctuated the sentence. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And you disagree with her taste?" "Doesn't matter what I think," Briggs muttered. "She paid my wages." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet you were near the East Wing at precisely the wrong time. These coincidences, they are troublesome." Briggs' grip tightened. "I didn't kill her. I wouldn't kill nobody." Poirot leaned in slightly. "I do not think you have the heart for murder, Monsieur Briggs. But fear makes men foolish." Briggs swallowed. Poirot smiled in gentle farewell and moved on. Inside, he found Mrs. Price seated elegantly with a book open in her lap, though she clearly had not read a line. "Madame," Poirot said courteously, "you quarrelled with Eleanor Whitfield some months ago." She lifted her chin. "Over a matter of garden design, hardly worth killing over." "Ah, but quarrels are rarely about what they claim to be," Poirot said softly. "They are the smoke the fire hides beneath." Mrs. Price's eyes narrowed. "You think me capable of such brutality?" Poirot bowed his head slightly. "Capable? Yes. Willing? That is different." She slammed her book shut and stood. "I will not be insulted," she said coldly. Poirot watched her go, satisfied, not by her indignation, but by the faint tremor in the hand holding her book. Later, Poirot found Julian March in the conservatory, staring blankly at a half-finished sketch that now shook slightly in his trembling grip. "Such a tender line," Poirot observed gently, pointing to the sketched curve of Eleanor's face. "It shows affection. Perhaps too much?" Julian's shoulders sagged. "I cared for her, deeply, but she didn't feel the same." "Unrequited affection," Poirot murmured. "It has led to tragedy before." Julian's voice cracked. "Are you accusing me?" Poirot shook his head. "No. I'm merely reminding you that love is a dangerous motive." Julian let out a small broken sound. Poirot nodded and quietly slipped away. Poirot sought out Lord and Lady Ashcombe last. He found them in their suite, she sitting stiffly before her vanity, he pacing with hands clasped behind his back. Their marriage, Poirot observed, had the appearance of unity but carried the fracture lines of too many unspoken truths. "Lord Ashcombe," Poirot said, "your watch was not stolen by accident." "It certainly wasn't placed in the garden by me," he snapped. Poirot raised an eyebrow, and yet someone knew its location, someone close. Lord Ashcombe's face flushed. Poirot turned to Lady Ashcombe. "Madame, Eleanor Whitfield was your friend, but she also knew things. Things about your husband's finances, perhaps. About his potential indiscretions." Lady Ashcombe stiffened. "Monsieur Poirot, that is improper." Poirot bowed his head. "Forgive me. I merely observed that the fear Eleanor carried last night. It was the fear of someone who has learned a truth too dangerous." A silence fell so heavy that Poirot almost pitied them. Almost. He excused himself politely and closed the door behind him. Everywhere Poirot walked, he left behind unease. Some grew defensive, some grew frightened. Some withdrew into themselves, but one person, reacted not with fear, but with calculation. Poirot saw it in the glint of an eye as he passed by the grand staircase, a flicker of controlled alarm, a tightening of the jaw, a sudden, deliberate exit toward the far corridor. Poirot paused. He smiled. "Voilà," he whispered. "The guilty conscience has begun to writhe." At last, when the house had grown quieter and Japp had retired to interrogate staff, Poirot returned to the morning room where the paper with "she" still lay. He unfolded it again. "She," he whispered. "Not she followed me. Not she threatened me. Simply she. Warning. A cry. A final message blinded by fear." Poirot tapped the paper thoughtfully. "Eleanor feared a woman," he murmured, "and a woman feared Eleanor." Two shadows following one another. His eyes narrowed, and one of them struck first. He closed the paper, slid it into his pocket, and rose with the poise of a man who now saw the shape of the enemy. "But why?" Poirot whispered. "Does she hide so cleverly, unless the truth, when revealed, would destroy more than her alone?" Night returned to Ravenhurst Manor not as a gentle curtain, but as a tightening noose. The house seemed to shrink under the weight of its whispers. Shadows stretched longer, doors creaked more sharply, and every footstep felt like an intrusion into a secret. Poirot sensed it immediately. The shift, the moment when fear ripens into desperation. And desperation, he knew, is when murderers act again. Inspector Japp had ordered all guests to remain inside for the night. A constable stood at each exit. No one was permitted into the gardens. Yet as the hours ticked toward midnight, the household grew restless. Some stayed in the drawing room, speaking in hushed tones. Others paced the corridors, unable to sleep. Poirot moved gracefully among them, observing, listening. Lady Ashcombe sat rigid beside the fireplace, staring into the embers as though the flames whispered confessions. Lord Ashcombe hovered near the window, the tension in his shoulders betraying the mask of authority. Beatrice Carter clutched a handkerchief, twisting it until the fabric gave way. Mrs. Price wrote letters she did not send. Julian March sketched frantic, trembling lines that made no sense. And Dr. Langley kept checking his watch. Poirot noticed every detail. Shortly after 11, Poirot decided it was time to check on Thomas Briggs once more. The gardener had been unusually unsettled earlier, sweating, stammering, avoiding eye contact. Fear, Poirot knew, can drive even the innocent to foolishness. He made his way to the servants' quarters, where Briggs had been ordered to remain. The constable on duty saluted. "Sir, Briggs stepped out to fetch water from the pump. Been gone a few minutes more than expected." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Fetch Japp," he said quietly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Poirot followed the narrow passage toward the back door leading to the pump yard, his polished shoes clicking in precise rhythm. Halfway down the corridor, he paused. A faint sound reached him, metal clinking softly, like a chain brushing stone. Poirot quickened his pace. He stepped into the dim back courtyard, just as a lantern bobbed at the far end. "Briggs!" Poirot called. No answer. The lantern swung once more, then fell, extinguishing itself against the stones. Poirot reached it in seconds. On the ground lay the lantern, a dented bucket, and Thomas Briggs sprawled beside it, his limbs twisted unnaturally. Dead. "What in blazes?" Japp's voice thundered through the courtyard as he arrived with two constables. Poirot knelt beside the gardener's body, studying him with solemn precision. "No wounds," he murmured. "No bruising, no defensive marks." Japp crouched. "Heart attack?" "No," Poirot said quietly. This man was young, healthy. Looked to the face. Briggs' expression was frozen in the same wide-eyed terror Eleanor Whitfield had worn. Poirot touched the man's jaw gently, and there it was, a faint trace of something at the corner of his mouth. A powder, pale, almost invisible. Japp frowned. "What's that?" Poirot stood slowly. "A sedative," he said. "But in the wrong measure, it becomes poison." Japp jolted. "You mean he was killed?" Poirot nodded. "Silenced," he said, before he could speak to me again. A hush fell. Japp straightened, bristling with fury. "Then the murderer is among the guests. Someone snuck out, slipped him poison." "No," Poirot interrupted gently. "Not someone who sneaks, someone who moves freely, someone who can be near victims without raising suspicion." Japp blinked. "Who then?" Poirot answered with a soft, chilling certainty. "A person who knows how to administer drugs. Someone with access. Someone whose profession gives them trust." Japp's eyes widened. "Langley." His voice was almost a whisper. Poirot didn't reply. He didn't need to. Back inside the manor, Poirot moved through the corridors with purpose. He found Dr. Langley in the library, sealing a set of vials into a leather case. "Doctor," Poirot said pleasantly, "you travel tonight." Langley startled. "Poirot, you frightened me. I was only organizing my equipment." Poirot approached the table. "These are sedatives, are they not?" Langley nodded stiffly. "Standard supplies." Poirot's eyes drifted to one empty slot in the case. "One is missing." Langley's voice tightened. "I used it earlier, for a guest who felt faint." Poirot folded his arms neatly. "That is strange. I've spoken to all the guests. None received medical assistance today." Langley swallowed. A drop of sweat slipped down his temple. Poirot's tone remained elegant, almost apologetic. "Doctor, Thomas Briggs has just been found dead, poisoned by a sedative." Langley went utterly still. Poirot leaned in, his voice soft as velvet. "And you, Doctor, you were the last person near him earlier this evening." Langley's breath hitched. I didn't. You think I poisoned him?" Poirot tilted his head. "I think someone poisoned him. And you, Dr. Langley, have now placed yourself at the center of suspicion." Langley backed away, knocking into a chair. "I may have enemies," he stammered, "but I am no murderer. You must believe me." Poirot regarded him with quiet curiosity. "I shall. Believe the truth when it presents itself, but tell me, Doctor, why are you packing? Why flee?" Langley's voice broke. "Because someone is framing me." Poirot's face softened. "Then why not come forward earlier? Why conceal your movements? Why hide your vials?" Langley's shoulders trembled. Poirot pressed further. "Whom did Eleanor fear?" She began to say a name. She... Were you aware of any woman who threatened her?" Langley shut his eyes. I can't speak of it." Poirot's voice sharpened. "Just enough. Doctor, more silence will only bury you." At that, Langley finally cracked. He sank into a chair, breathing hard, eyes haunted. "There was a woman," he whispered. "A woman Eleanor mentioned. A woman she said had returned. A woman she feared with her whole soul." Poirot leaned close. "Her name?" he asked quietly. Langley's lips trembled. "She called her..." He swallowed. "She called her the woman who followed shadows." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, so the game deepens." Japp burst into the room at that exact moment. "Poirot, 2 guests say they saw a tall woman in a cloak near the garden door just now." Poirot did not flinch. "Of course," he murmured. "She grows bold. She has killed twice, once in fear and once in necessity." Japp stared. Poirot finished. "And now she knows we are close. She will strike again before the night is through." A storm gathered over Ravenhurst Manor, low clouds pressing heavy against the sky, wind whispering like an omen through the hedges. Inside, the tension reached its peak. Every person in the house now knew someone among them had killed not once, but twice, and the murderer was getting desperate. It was nearly 1 a.m. when Poirot summoned all the remaining suspects to the drawing room. Constables lined the walls. The fireplace glowed faintly, casting tall shadows that danced like restless spirits. Japp looked annoyed. Lord Ashcombe looked frightened. Lady Ashcombe, pale and composed, held her husband's arm as though anchoring herself. Beatrice Carter sat rigidly, hands clenched in her lap. Mrs. Price glared at everyone with a cold superiority that no accusation could soften. Julian March nervously wrung his fingers. Dr. Langley sat with head bowed, his face drawn and exhausted. Poirot entered last, slow, dignified, immaculate. "As I look around this room," he began, "I see fear, confusion, and secrets. Many secrets." He paused, allowing the words to settle. "I also see that the true murderer no longer hides in the dark. She has been among us from the start, and now she grows reckless." A ripple moved through the group. Japp stepped forward. "Poirot, if you've got something, say it plainly, because I am running out of patience." Poirot clasped his hands. "I have been waiting," he said softly, "waiting for her to make her move. And she has." He turned toward Dr. Langley. "Doctor, you said Eleanor feared a woman who had returned, a woman she called the woman who followed shadows." Langley nodded weakly. Poirot continued, "This woman, she is no intruder, no stranger. She is someone intimately connected with at least one person in this room." Eyes widened, and she has killed twice to protect a secret that would ruin her. Poirot scanned the room slowly. She has followed Eleanor Whitfield for weeks in fear that her past, her true identity, would be exposed. Japp frowned. "Identity? What are you talking about?" Poirot lifted a hand. "Before her death, Eleanor tried to warn us. She wrote only one word before she died. She." Everyone stiffened. "And Briggs," Poirot added, "died after attempting to tell me what he saw in the garden, a woman cloaked, watching the house." Poirot stepped closer to the fireplace. "But who is she?" Poirot faced Beatrice Carter. "Mademoiselle, your aunt recently changed her will." "Did she not?" Beatrice gasped. "How do you—" "Because she told someone who confronted her, someone who had much to lose if the will changed." Beatrice trembled. "She was going to support me. She promised." Poirot held up a hand. "But she no longer trusted you. She suspected you had been sharing her private letters with someone." Beatrice's face crumpled. I needed the money." Poirot's tone remained gentle. "You are not the murderer, mademoiselle. Your desperation is financial, not lethal." Beatrice broke down in tears. Poirot turned next to Mrs. Price. "Madame Price, you harbor resentment. You and Eleanor had a quarrel, but anger alone is not enough to kill twice." Mrs. Price stiffened, insulted. Poirot dismissed her with a slight turn of his head. Then he approached Lord Ashcombe. "Your watch," Poirot said softly. "It was not stolen, it was planted." Lord Ashcombe recoiled. "Planted? By whom?" "By someone who knew your temper. Someone who hoped suspicion would fall on you, or perhaps on a thief." His eyes cut toward the others, but Poirot moved on. Poirot stood at the center of the room. "The woman in the midnight blue dress, she's not a phantom. She's real. She's connected to this house." Lady Ashcombe gasped. "You mean one of us knows her?" Poirot nodded. "More than that. One of you knows her intimately. She's bound to you by blood, by duty, and by a crime long buried." The room froze. Poirot's gaze shifted to the person who had been the quietest, the most careful. The person whose profession allowed access to poison, whose hands trembled not from guilt, but from fear, who grew pale each time the mysterious woman was mentioned. Poirot looked directly at Dr. Leonard Langley. Langley's head snapped up. "No," he whispered. "No, Poirot, I swear." Poirot raised his hand. "Doctor, I know you did not kill Eleanor Whitfield, but you know who did." Langley shivered. Poirot's voice softened. "You knew she had returned. You knew Eleanor feared her, and you knew Thomas Briggs saw her." Langley's breathing quickened. Poirot stepped close enough that only Langley could hear the next words. "Tell them about your sister." A gasp rippled through the room. Langley's face collapsed. "My sister is dead," he whispered. Poirot shook his head. "No, your sister is alive, and she is here." The air constricted. Japp barked. "Poirot, what are you saying?" Poirot's eyes never left Langley's. "I say, Inspector, that the woman we seek, the woman Eleanor called the woman who followed shadows, is none other than Dr. Langley's estranged sister, Eliza Langley." Gasps erupted. Langley buried his face in his hands. "I tried to stop her. I tried—" Poirot raised his voice. "Eliza Langley worked as a nurse. She was dismissed years ago after accusations of malpractice, a scandal Eleanor Whitfield knew of, because Eleanor had been one of the trustees who signed the complaint." The room reeled. "She disappeared," Poirot continued, "changing her name, living in shadow. But Eleanor recognized her, at the gala, the woman in the blue dress." Lady Ashcombe whispered. "So she followed Eleanor to silence her." Poirot nodded. "And Thomas Briggs saw her fleeing after the murder. She poisoned him before he could tell us." Japp shouted, "Where is she now?" Poirot's voice dropped to a cold, quiet certainty. "She is still inside the house." Everyone stiffened. Poirot pointed toward the long hallway beyond the drawing room. "And she is coming toward us. Right now." All heads whipped toward the doorway, just as a tall figure in a dark blue cloak appeared at the end of the corridor. The woman who followed shadows. Her face hidden, her steps slow and deliberate, moving toward them with the inevitability of fate. Lady Ashcombe screamed. Beatrice shrank away. Mrs. Price gasped. Japp reached for his revolver, but Poirot stood perfectly still. His eyes shone with calm triumph. "Voila," he whispered. "The shadow steps into the light." The figure in the midnight blue cloak paused at the far end of the hallway, half in light, half swallowed by shadow. The house seemed to exhale as one. Gasps, whispers, the shuffle of chairs. Every person in the drawing room shrank back instinctively except one. Poirot. He stood calmly, hands clasped behind his back, head tilted slightly as though welcoming an expected guest. Inspector Japp, hand on his revolver, growled, "Don't move!" The woman did not flinch. Instead, with slow, deliberate precision, she raised her hands and pushed back the hood of her cloak. A pale, angular face emerged. Dark eyes, tired, sunken, haunted. Cheekbones sharp enough to cut light. Hair streaked with grey, though. She could not yet have been more than 40. Poirot bowed slightly. "Bonsoir, Mademoiselle Eliza Langley." The room erupted into whispers. Dr. Langley stumbled to his feet. "Eliza! Oh, God! Eliza, what have you done?" She did not answer him. Her eyes, hollow yet burning, were fixed on Poirot alone. "You knew," she whispered. Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, I suspected your presence long before now. The woman who avoids attention is more visible than she believes." Japp moved forward. "Eliza Langley, you're coming with—" Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, Inspector. A murderer cornered is a dangerous thing, and she has not yet spoken." Eliza's lips curled into a bitter, exhausted smile. "I will speak. I've been waiting to speak." She stepped into the drawing room. Every suspect recoiled. Poirot alone stepped forward to meet her. Eliza looked around the room, her gaze like cold wind passing over each person. "They thought I was dead," she said softly. "I wanted it that way. Better to be dead than to live with the shame Eleanor Whitfield gave me." Beatrice Carter shivered. "What shame?" Eliza laughed, a thin, brittle sound. "You wouldn't understand. You have all lived fine lives. Clean lives. But I was a nurse. And once, only once, I made a mistake." Dr. Langley whispered, "It wasn't your fault." She cut him with a sharp glance. "Don't defend me." Poirot stepped closer. "Eleanor Whitfield discovered your identity, did she not? She recognized you last night." Eliza nodded slowly. She always had a good memory. Too good. Lady Ashcombe clasped her hands together. But why kill her? Because she would have destroyed me again, Eliza hissed. She told me she would go to the trustees. They would remove me from my new position, accuse me of deception, maybe even arrest me. Poirot's voice was soft but cutting. And so you followed her into the East Wing. You confronted her. Eliza's shoulders sagged. I didn't mean to kill her. I only wanted to scare her, to make her promise she'd keep silent, but she panicked and grabbed me. My cloak tore, and she screamed. I pushed her. Her necklace caught in my hand. A single pearl dropped from her cloak pocket and rolled across the floor. Poirot watched it settle. And then, he prompted gently. Eliza's voice broke. And then she fell. Just fell. I didn't mean to. Her breath hitched. But when she lay there and I saw her not breathing, I knew no one would believe me. Beatrice covered her mouth. Mrs. Price turned away. Julian March made a strangled sound. Poirot, however, remained unmoved. Then you fled to the garden, he said. Yes. I hid the pocket watch thinking they'd think it was theft, and Briggs saw me. He recognized me. He said he'd tell Poirot. And so, Poirot said quietly, you poisoned him. She bowed her head. Yes. Japp muttered a curse under his breath. Poirot sighed. 2 tragedies, Mademoiselle Langley. But you see, I knew there was more. Something deeper, something Eleanor discovered that frightened not only you, but others. Eliza stiffened. The room froze. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You see, he continued softly, you were not the only one who wished Eleanor Whitfield silent. Heads shot up. Japp blinked. Poirot, what are you saying? Eliza already admitted killing her. Poirot held up a single finger. Ah, Inspector, she admitted causing her death, but intent and accident are not the same, and our murderer has been far more methodical. The room vibrated with shock. Eliza's face twisted with confusion. What do you mean? I killed her. I told you. No, Poirot said gently. You did not. A stunned silence fell. Even Japp faltered. Poirot. She strangled her. She admits she fought with her. Poirot shook his head. You fought, yes, but the bruises on Eleanor's neck, they do not match your fingers. Eliza froze, horror flooding her eyes. Poirot continued. You tugged her necklace as she fell, but the pressure marks were deeper, higher, and on the opposite side of the throat. Japp's hand tightened on his revolver. Poirot turned slowly toward the rest of the room. Someone else found Eleanor after Eliza fled. Someone who finished the job. A wave of gasps. Poirot's voice dropped into a near whisper. And Eleanor Whitfield knew this person's darkest secret, a secret she intended to reveal after the gala. His gaze drifted across the room, from Beatrice's trembling form, to Lord Ashcombe's beads of sweat, to Mrs. Price's stone-cold composure, to Julian March's shaking hands, to Dr. Langley's haunted guilt. And then Poirot stopped, his eyes locked onto one face. Calm, controlled, too controlled. Lady Ashcombe. She froze under his gaze. Every drop of color drained from her cheeks. Poirot spoke softly. Madame, your motive lies not in jealousy, nor money, nor anger. He stepped closer. It lies in fear. Lady Ashcombe's lips trembled. Poirot delivered the line with quiet finality. You killed Eleanor Whitfield. The room erupted. Gasps, cries, disbelief. Eliza staggered back in shock. Japp's revolver swung toward Lady Ashcombe. Lord Ashcombe choked out, Impossible! Poirot raised both hands. The killer is she, he repeated. With motive, with opportunity, with calculation. Lady Ashcombe's eyes filled with tears, but her voice hardened. You cannot prove that. Poirot smiled very softly. But I can. He reached into his jacket and drew out the final damning clue, The clue he had been waiting for, the clue Eleanor had unknowingly left behind. For a moment, the drawing room was a tableau of shock. Eliza Langley, trembling under the weight of her confession, Lord Ashcombe frozen with disbelief, Japp gripping his revolver in startled readiness, and Lady Ashcombe standing perfectly still, as though rooted to the floor by an invisible force. Poirot alone remained composed, his eyes gleaming with that serene, devastating certainty that comes only when the little grey cells have aligned every piece of the puzzle. "Sit down, everyone," Poirot said quietly. There was no command in his tone, only inevitability. They obeyed. Lady Ashcombe did not move. Poirot turned to her gently. "Madame, please." She moved. Slowly, mechanically, like someone walking toward her own verdict. Poirot stepped to the center of the room, lifted his hand, and revealed a small object, a delicate golden locket, its chain broken. A ripple spread across the room. Lady Ashcombe swayed. Poirot spoke softly. "This locket was found beneath Eleanor Whitfield's body. Not hers, yours." The clasp broke in the struggle. Japp blurted, "Good Lord." Poirot continued, "Inside the locket is a miniature portrait. A portrait not of your children nor your husband, but of another man entirely." Lord Ashcombe stiffened. Lady Ashcombe's fingers twitched toward her throat, toward the spot where she always wore that locket. Poirot opened it so all could see the painted face within. Lord Ashcombe's expression collapsed. "My God," he whispered. "Is that—" "Yes," Poirot said delicately. "That is Richard Haldon, your first fiancé." Gasps rose. Beatrice stared. Mrs. Price clutched her pearls. Julianne March whispered, "But he's dead. He died 20 years ago." Poirot nodded. Or so the world was meant to believe. Lady Ashcombe closed her eyes. Poirot turned to the group. "Richard Haldon did not die 20 years ago. He went to prison for fraud. A scandal his family buried. When he was released 6 months ago, he wrote to Lady Ashcombe." Lady Ashcombe's breath hitched. Poirot continued, "Eleanor Whitfield was a trustee of the charity Haldon once managed. She recognized his handwriting on a letter Lady Ashcombe foolishly discarded. She confronted her privately last night. Lady Ashcombe whispered. She said she would tell my husband. Tell everyone. She said society must know." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "Your position, your reputation, even your marriage. Everything would collapse if it became known that your old fiancé, disgraced and imprisoned, had re-entered your life." Lord Ashcombe stared at her, stricken. "You told me he died." Lady Ashcombe's voice trembled. "Because I thought he was dead to me. And when he came back, ashamed, broken, I could not turn him away." Poirot's voice was gentle but relentless. "So you silenced Eleanor." Poirot lifted a finger. "Let us see the sequence with clarity. 1. Eleanor confronted you. She told you she knew the truth. She threatened to reveal it. 2. She went to the East Wing, alone. Eliza Langley followed her, terrified of her own exposure. 3. Eliza frightened Eleanor. There was a struggle. The necklace broke. Eleanor fell. Eliza fled. 4. But Eleanor did not die in that fall." Poirot's voice sharpened. "This is crucial. Eleanor Whitfield was stunned, but alive." Eliza gasped. "What? What are you saying?" Poirot looked at her kindly. "You did not kill her. You left her breathing." Eliza collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Poirot continued. 5. Lady Ashcombe entered moments later. Eleanor was regaining consciousness. She tried to speak. She tried to warn you she had learned of your secret. Lady Ashcombe shook violently. Poirot's tone turned grave. "And at that moment, overwhelmed by fear, not hatred, you panicked. You pressed your hands to her throat. You ended her life." The fire crackled. No one breathed. Poirot resumed. You thought no one would suspect a gracious hostess, and indeed you acted with cunning. You screamed to draw attention away from the truth. You claimed you found the body unexpectedly. You allowed the mystery of the woman in blue to grow, using her as a convenient scapegoat. Japp muttered, "Bloody hell." Poirot added, "But when I found your locket hidden beneath Eleanor's body, I knew." Lady Ashcombe stared ahead, hollow-eyed. Poirot turned toward her again, and when Thomas Briggs saw something in the garden, a silhouette, a retreat, you feared he might reveal what he saw. So you followed him. You chose a moment when the house was distracted. You gave him a drink under the guise of kindness, and laced it with the sedative he was later found with. Lady Ashcombe shook her head frantically. No, I didn't poison him." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "No, madame, you misunderstand." The room froze. Poirot spoke softly. "You did not poison Thomas Briggs." He turned, slowly, deliberately, toward Dr. Leonard Langley. Langley went white. Poirot addressed the stunned crowd. "Dr. Langley poisoned Briggs, not to protect the murderer, but to protect his sister, Eliza. He believed Briggs had seen her. He feared she would be arrested. In panic, he acted." Langley burst into tears. I didn't know Eleanor was still alive when Eliza left. I thought—" Poirot placed a hand on his shoulder. "You acted out of love. A tragic, foolish love. But you are not the murderer of Eleanor Whitfield." Langley sobbed. Japp exploded. "Poirot, so who? What?" Poirot's voice sliced the air. "Lady Ashcombe killed Eleanor Whitfield. Dr. Langley killed Thomas Briggs." Stunned silence. Lord Ashcombe stared at his wife with a look of devastation. She whispered, "I didn't mean to kill her. I only wanted her silent. Just silent." Poirot bowed his head. "I know, madame. But in murder, intention does not erase the deed." She closed her eyes. And finally, Lady Ashcombe broke. She sank to her knees, sobbing into her hands. Lord Ashcombe stood frozen, neither approaching nor retreating. Japp stepped forward, voice tight. "Lady Ashcombe, I'm afraid you're coming with us." She did not resist. Poirot watched her led away, her sobs fading down the long corridor like the last echoes of a broken life. Poirot turned to the remaining guests, each pale, shaken, humbled. "We are not quite finished," he said quietly. "Tomorrow morning, mes amis, I shall reveal the final truth." The room stiffened in confusion. Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. "For there is still one question unanswered." He clasped his hands. "And it is the key to everything." Dawn crept over Ravenhurst Manor with a wary gentleness, as if morning itself feared to disturb the heavy air lingering after the night's revelations. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was deeper than any thunder. The guests, those who remained, assembled one last time in the drawing room. They looked worn, hollow-eyed, as though each had aged a decade overnight. Even Inspector Japp appeared subdued, though he tried unsuccessfully to disguise it with brisk muttering and a stern posture. Poirot entered quietly, not triumphant, not weary, simply composed, immaculate as ever, with only the faintest solemnity in his gaze. He stood before them, hands lightly clasped. "Mes amis," he began, "the murderer has been arrested. The second killer has confessed, and yet one question remains." The room tensed. Beatrice whispered, "Another murderer?" "No," Poirot said gently. "No more killers. Only one more truth." He paused, deliberately, delicately, then continued. "When Eleanor Whitfield died," Poirot said, "she tried to write something." Japp frowned. "She wrote 'she.' You showed us." Poirot nodded. "Oui, but that was not all. A scrap of paper I found. It had been torn in half. The second half was missing." Japp blinked. "You never said—" Poirot raised a hand. "It was not yet time. He reached into his pocket and removed a folded paper, worn, faintly smudged with Eleanor's final trembling. He unfolded it slowly. The room held its breath. On the paper were 2 words. She knows. A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Price paled. Julian March swallowed hard. Lord Ashcombe flinched. Beatrice stammered, "Knows? About what?" Poirot let the silence stretch before answering. Eleanor Whitfield learned something. Not only about Lady Ashcombe or Eliza Langley. She learned something about one of you. Something that frightened her enough to speak in secret. Something that explains the fear she carried all evening. He turned to the fireplace, his back to them, his voice soft. The clue she left us was not to identify her killer. It was to warn us. Who else had something to hide? He turned around. And that person is Julian March. The artist froze, color draining from his face. Julian stood, shaking his head. No, I didn't kill anyone." Poirot raised his hand gently. "Calm yourself. I do not accuse you of murder." Julian swallowed. His trembling eased, but only slightly. Poirot continued. "But Eleanor Whitfield knew your secret. She told Lady Ashcombe earlier that night she had uncovered an unpleasant deceit involving one of the gala's guests. She did not name you, but she intended to." Japp's eyebrows shot up. "What deceit?" Poirot stepped closer to Julian. "Your debt." Julian stiffened. Poirot pressed on. "You told us Eleanor supported your art, that she lent you money. But the truth, monsieur, is that you forged checks in her name. You stole from her." A stunned silence. Julian whispered, She would have understood. I only borrowed." Poirot's voice hardened. "You deceived her, and she discovered it on the night of the gala." Julian collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I was going to confess, I swear I was, but everything happened so fast. She died, and then—" Poirot's tone softened again. "You are not a murderer, monsieur. But theft carries its own consequences." Japp muttered, "So Eleanor intended to expose him." "Lord." Beatrice stared at Julian with a mixture of pity and disgust. Mrs. Price sniffed sharply. Poirot, however, raised his hand to quiet the room. "This final truth does not change the outcome of the murders," he said. "But Eleanor's message, 'She knows,' was meant to reveal her dread. She feared Lady Ashcombe most of all, for Lady Ashcombe alone knew the locket, the past, the scandal that had reawakened." He folded the paper again. "And so, the truth is complete." Inspector Japp stepped forward. "Lady Ashcombe will be charged with murder, Dr. Langley with manslaughter. Eliza Langley will face trial for attempting to conceal the crime and fleeing the scene." Beatrice wiped her eyes. Lord Ashcombe stared into the hearth, a broken man. Julian rose weakly. "What will happen to me?" Poirot nodded sadly. "You will confess to the forgery. Eleanor's estate will decide your fate. Perhaps mercy will find you." Julian nodded, ashamed. Poirot surveyed the room one last time. Each life had shattered in its own way, but Chaucer was right. Murder was the stone that, once dropped into a pond, sent rings of destruction in every direction. The guests began to disperse. Constables escorted Langley away. Others stumbled out, hollow and exhausted. At last, Poirot remained alone in the drawing room with Japp. The inspector shook his head. "Poirot, I swear, every time I think I've seen the worst of human nature, a case like this comes along." Poirot smiled, faintly and sadly. "Non, mon ami. Not the worst, only the fearful." Japp raised an eyebrow. "Fearful?" Poirot nodded, hands clasped behind his back. "Yes. Look at them all. Lady Ashcombe feared disgrace. Eliza feared her past. Langley feared losing his sister. Julian feared bankruptcy. Even poor Eleanor feared the return of old shadows." He looked out the window, where the first morning light crept across the garden. It is fear, Inspector, not hatred, that so often leads people to commit the unforgivable. Japp sighed. You're a philosopher this morning. Poirot smiled softly, as one must be, after murder. Japp clapped him on the shoulder. Well, come on, Poirot. Breakfast awaits, and I, for one, could use a strong cup of tea. Poirot nodded graciously. But first, mon ami, he straightened his tie, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle. I must arrange my moustaches. For justice has been served, and Hercule Poirot must look impeccable in the aftermath. And with that, the great detective walked out of Ravenhurst Manor, leaving the crime solved, the guilty revealed, and the mysteries of the human heart lingering like the final echo of a fading waltz.